Our protagonist was born as an illegitimate child of one of the most powerful martial arts families. From a young age, his only goal was to earn his family's recognition. But his dream shattered when he was diagnosed with an illness that stopped him from practicing martial arts or training in magic. Cast out and abandoned, he was ultimately betrayed and killed by his own relatives. Yet fate gave him a second chance, returning to the moment of his birth with newfound abilities and a fierce determination to set everything right. Our story begins in the unexplored northern region of Korea, where a group of mercenaries is accompanied by several masked individuals on a mission to that area. A boy brown-hair mercenary watches the masked individuals with a worried gaze, and one of his companions, gray-haired man, notices that brown-haired boy looks disturbed. Gray-haired man asks if this is his first exploration mission. Brown-haired boy replies that he has ventured into gates and dungeons before, but this is his first time entering an unexplored region, which makes him somewhat nervous. Gray-haired man laughs, telling him that he'd better keep his composure, as no one has set foot in these areas for hundreds of years, meaning they are likely teeming with monsters, and they might even encounter some ancient beasts. Brown-haired boy responds by saying that despite this, they can rely on their expedition leader, especially since he belongs to the prestigious Lee family and is the patriarch's brother, which means his strength must be formidable. At that moment, gray-haired man's expression changes, and he glances at the leader with a smirk, questioning whether he is truly referring to that man. Gray-haired man then explains that the leader is nothing more than an illegitimate son who was cast out of the clan for his weakness. Finally, the expedition leader is revealed. He is the 9th illegitimate son of the Lee family and the MC of our story, Lee Cheol. The gray-haired man continues, saying that Cheol not only lacks talent but also seems lazy, as Cheol remains merely a 7th-rank martial artist despite his age. Just then, one of the masked individuals approaches Cheol and informs him that it is time to move. Cheol looks at him for a moment without saying a word, then gives a brief nod before standing up to follow them. It is later revealed that these masked individuals belong to the Shadow Sword Squad, directly serving the patriarch of the prestigious Lee family. Their mission is supposedly to protect Cheol, yet Cheol does not feel reassured, as Cheol harbors suspicions that something about this mission is off. We then told about our MC's past, which was not always so grim. As a child, Cheol was filled with dreams and ambitions to prove himself within the great family he was born into as an illegitimate son. His hopes soared when he was chosen by the highest-ranking weapon during the family's steel ceremony. At that moment, Cheol believed that if he continued to work hard and give it his all, the day might come when he would earn everyone's recognition. However, things did not go as Cheol had expected. He was later diagnosed with a strange illness that afflicted his mana pathways, and the shock came when the doctor informed him that Cheol would never be able to learn magic, nor would martial arts be stable if Cheol attempted to practice them under such circumstances. Reaching the 9th rank would be nothing short of a miracle. Cheol's father was deeply saddened when the butler delivered this news to him. When the family members learned of it, they dismissed what happened during the steel ceremony as a mere mistake or coincidence. Despite this, Cheol did not give up. He persevered and reached the 7th rank by the age of 25, determined to prove the doctor wrong. Cheol was overjoyed with his achievement, even though all his siblings had reached the 7th rank at a much younger age. But Cheol's joy was short-lived as he was expelled from the clan when he turned 30. If it hadn't been for his eldest brother's intervention, Cheol would have left as a corpse. Cheol remained on the run for 10 whole years. During that time, chaos spread, the unexplored regions expanded, and monster raids grew in both number and severity. One day, as Cheol sat on the street like a beggar, a newspaper flew into his face, which Cheol caught by chance. His eyes welled up with tears as Cheol read it. He had just discovered that his father, the man who once reigned supreme in martial arts and was the patriarch of the esteemed Lee clan, had passed away. Cheol's shock only deepened when he heard someone addressing him as young master. Cheol looked up to find 2 members of the Shadow Sword Squad standing before him. Cheol tossed the newspaper aside and asked them sharply how they had found him, but they did not respond. Instead, one of them handed him an official decree addressed to him. Frustrated by their disregard for his question, Chil took the decree to examine it. Chil discovers that it is an assignment for an exploration mission in a specific area, but what strikes him as odd is that it bears the signature of Patriarch Gunsong. Chil is surprised, as Gunsong is his third brother, prompting him to wonder what happened to his eldest brother. His thoughts are interrupted by one of the Shadow Sword members, who informs him that departure is set for an hour from now. As the masked man turns to leave, Chil asks him to wait and inquiries about his eldest brother's fate, but receives no response. Realizing that the team members will not divulge any information on the matter, Chil tries to understand why he has been assigned such a mission, especially since he hasn't wielded a sword in 10 years and is merely a 7th-ranked martial artist. The masked man then turns to Chil, asking if he means to say that he is refusing the order. Chil knows well that refusal means death, so he replies that he will carry out the mission. The Shadow Sword members vanish instantly, as if they had disappeared. Chil grows even more furious over the lack of information and the mission he has been forced into. We return to the present, where Chil is walking with the masked individuals and the mercenaries toward their destination. Suddenly, a brown-haired mercenary stops, his face filled with astonishment upon noticing something unusual. Before him stands an abandoned building, surprisingly intact despite being in such an isolated region. One of the masked men informs Chil that they will be entering without hesitation. They pass through the gate and cautiously begin exploring the place. As soon as they step inside, they are stunned by the overwhelming number of skulls and skeletal remains, both human and beast alike. But what shocks them even more is the presence of an ancient beast's corpse. At that moment, one of the masked individuals orders his comrades to begin without hesitation. They swiftly charge at the mercenaries, and in an instant, they begin slaughtering them one by one. Chil and a gray-haired mercenary are left in utter shock at the scene unfolding before them. They scream, demanding to know what is happening. One of the masked men responds while attacking the gray-haired mercenary beside Chil, telling him that he should have realized from the start that Chil was doomed. The masked man adds that it is an honor to die for the will of the clan. But before the masked man can deliver the fatal blow to the gray-haired mercenary, a sword suddenly pierces his abdomen. It is quickly revealed that Chil was the one who struck the masked man, demanding to know who is behind all this. However, to Chil's astonishment, the masked man remains standing despite the wound. The masked man grabs the sword lodged in his body and informs Chil that they were ordered to bring him to this place, then kill him swiftly, without leaving a trace. Before Chil can react, the masked man shatters the sword with his bare hand, warning Chil not to resist unless he wishes to suffer before dying. Chil's shock intensifies as he watches the masked man's wound heal within mere seconds. At that moment, a black-haired mercenary attempts to attack the masked man from behind. However, the masked man turns in the blink of an eye and slices the black-haired mercenary in half with a single strike. Chil falls to the ground, barely dodging the same fate. The masked man sneers at Chil, calling him pathetic for thinking that Chil would be stronger than this. The masked man then dashes forward at incredible speed and delivers a powerful kick, sending Chil flying across the room until Chil crashes into the corpse of the ancient beast lying there. The impact leaves Chil in unbearable pain, causing him to cough up blood. Despite the agony, an overwhelming rage surges within him. Chil refuses to die like this. He desperately searches for a way to survive and realizes he needs a weapon. Scanning his surroundings, Chil spots an old sword embedded in the corpse of a massive beast nearby. Without hesitation, Chil rushes toward it, thinking that even if it is old, a sword strong enough to kill such a formidable creature must surely still be usable. Chil pulls the sword, hoping it will be of use, but he is taken aback by what happens next and freezes in place. Before his eyes, the sword crumbles into dust and vanishes into the air. Chil is unable to comprehend why this is happening or how to react. The masked man approaches, remarking that he never expected a member of the Li clan to be this weak. Still, at the very least, Chil will die bearing such a great name, the masked man says before delivering the finishing blow. Cheol collapses to the ground, struck down by the masked man. Cheol wonders if this is truly how it all ends, after a life filled with nothing but hardship and endless running. Meanwhile, the sword continues to dissipate into nothingness as Cheol lingers on the edge of death. He thinks that if he were given another chance at life. As Cheol sinks into the abyss, he hears a voice asking whether this child is Yujung's son. The voice startles him. It belongs to his father. When he opens his eyes, Cheol sees his father asking the butler about Yujung's fate. The butler responds that when they found her, Yujung had already passed away. Cheol's confusion grows. Not only was his father supposed to be dead, but he also looks younger, and even the butler appears much younger as well. Cheol tries to reach out to call them, only to be shocked when he sees a small hand. Examining it further, he is utterly stunned to realize that it is his own hand. Cheol is overwhelmed, unable to grasp what is happening or how Cheol is still alive. He assumes that he must be witnessing his life flashing before his eyes before moving on to the afterlife. Just then, Cheol hears his father say, "Young will be a suitable name for him." Lee Jae-shin then instructs the butler to arrange for a servant and a few Shadow Force members to serve as the child's guards. Lee Jae-shin, Cheol's father, also orders that the boy be prepared to attend the steel selection ceremony alongside the 8th child. The butler acknowledges the order immediately, but he also expresses concern, pointing out that the child is still too young and unprepared, as is the 8th child, who is only a few months older. However, Lee Jae-shin, the leader of the Lee Marshall clan, dismisses the concern, stating that it does not matter. This response leaves Cheol even more shocked. He finally exhales when Cheol's father leaves the room, as his presence exuded an overwhelming aura of power and authority, even though it had been a long time since he had seen his father. Cheol begins to reflect again, wondering if this is truly real. Everything feels too tangible to be a mere recollection of memories, and the conversation that just took place actually happened. It was not just an illusion or an old memory. Yet, Cheol struggles to accept it, telling himself that this cannot be real. If it is, then it means Cheol has returned to his miserable past once again. Months pass following Cheol's return to the past, and the awaited day finally arrives within the esteemed Lee clan. It is the day of the steel selection ceremony, where the clan's children showcase their talents based on the weapons that choose them. Cheol's father had been chosen by many weapons, making him the greatest swordsman of his generation. Meanwhile, the swords had chosen Cheol's eldest brother, Tomas, who became renowned for his mastery of both magic and swordsmanship. Now it is Cheol's turn, and he feels immense pressure and anxiety about this event. But Cheol's thoughts are interrupted as his maid, Moongawa, enters the room with excitement, exclaiming that the young master is fully prepared. She notes with admiration that despite being in a new environment, the young master never cries and is an exceptionally mature and quiet child. Gawa then picks Cheol up in her arms and assures him with confidence that he will emerge from the ceremony with remarkable choices, paving the way for a bright future ahead. Cheol is deeply moved by her words. To him, Gawa was like a mother. Unfortunately, she had been forced to leave the estate due to the jealousy and malice of his older siblings. Gawa was the only one who had ever wept for Cheol's loneliness as a child and had stayed by his side until the very end. Determined not to let history repeat itself, Cheol makes a firm decision. He will protect Gawa no matter what it takes. At that moment, another maid enters the room, informing them that the preparations for the ceremony are complete and that they must leave immediately. At the same time, Lee Jae-shin is informed that the preparations are complete, meaning they can proceed now without delay. Lord Lee Jae-shin begins making his way to the ceremony site, followed by the children and their attendants. Upon their arrival at the vast ceremonial grounds, where a large crowd is gathered, attention is drawn to Cheol, who is regarded as the illegitimate son brought from the outside. Little is known about his origins or lineage, except that Cheol is the son of the clan leader, Lord Lee Jae-shin. A discussion arises among the clan elders regarding this matter. Present in the gathering are Lady Baekwaeun, the esteemed clan minister, Lord Lee Jae-hong, the eldest son of the clan, Lee Myung-jung, and the third son, Lee Gun-song. The eldest son, Myung-jung, expresses his surprise, stating that he does not recall any of them participating in the ceremony at such a young age. His younger brother, Gun-song, responds, admitting that he too finds the situation strange and unexpected. Gun-song wonders how this brother suddenly appeared among them, but is nonetheless curious to see what will happen. Patriarch Lee Jae-shin officially announces the commencement of the steel selection ceremony. Lee Jae-shin addresses one of the attendants, instructing her to bring the eighth child, Hwa, immediately to begin the ritual. The attendant steps forward, carrying the chosen girl, who is the eighth among the children selected for the ceremony that day. Lord Jae-shin retrieves a sharp knife from his pocket to begin the ritual. He then takes the hand of the young girl, Hwa, who is filled with bewilderment at what is happening. The child is taken aback when the patriarch Jae-shin makes a cut on her hand, causing her finger to bleed. Hwa bursts into tears from the shock and pain, but the ceremony continues. One of the most prestigious swords, the ivory blade, selects Hwa. This sword is considered an artistic masterpiece and had never responded to any previous generation. Lord Lee Jae-shin takes the sword and declares that from this moment on, the ivory sword belongs to Hwa. The attendants rejoice and congratulate Lady Baekwaeun on the occasion, considering the child a rare talent born into this esteemed family. Lady Baek smiles confidently and thanks them for their compliments and blessings. Following this, Lord Jae-shin announces that it is now time for Young's ritual. Upon hearing this name, the audience immediately realizes that it refers to the illegitimate child brought from the outside. They question how this child is being allowed to participate in such a sacred ceremony. However, the patriarch Jae-shin ignores the murmurs and proceeds with the ritual, cutting Cheol's finger. The child does not shed any tears, though he feels a slight pain, prompting the patriarch Jae-shin to pat Cheol's head in praise of his bravery. Cheol recalls that in his previous life, he had been chosen by the clear Echo Sword, one of the heavenly ranked blades. However, he understands that he cannot rely on his past choices in this life. Meanwhile, Lord Jae-hong observes the situation, listening to the murmurs of those opposing the participation of Jae-shin's illegitimate child in the ceremony. Lady Baek's expression also suggests she is not in a good mood. Yet, when Jae-hong considers the matter himself, he finds that having an illegitimate son of his brother is not surprising. However, Jae-hong also realizes that if the situation remains unchanged, the boy will face a difficult life. Surviving here as an illegitimate son would be nearly impossible. For instance, the strict elder of the clan, Lee Cheol-jung, makes his presence known, showing clear interest in the illegitimate child. Jae-hong treats him respectfully, despite feeling uneasy and finding it difficult to read the elder's expression. The elderly Cheol-jung asks Jae-hong whether this is the child that the patriarch, Jae-shin, brought to the estate. Jae-hong confirms, stating that this is indeed the child whom the Shadow Force discovered and retrieved. Elder Cheol-jung expresses his surprise at the patriarch's Jae-shin's decision, questioning why he would bring in an illegitimate child of unknown origins and allow him to participate in the steel selection ceremony in such a manner. However, in the end, Cheol-jung concedes that if the patriarch Jae-shin has tested the child himself, then he must know that this ceremony is meaningless for an illegitimate child. Minister Jae-hong grows angry at the elder's remark and sharply demands to know what he means by such words. Cheol-jung apologizes and responds, explaining that his own story is not much different. He too was once an illegitimate child who failed miserably in being chosen by any weapon. It is a well-known tale. An illegitimate child will always remain just that, and Cheol-jung must know his place. Minister Jae-hong grows enraged, unable to tolerate Elder Cheol-jung's insinuations any longer, and bursts out in fury, declaring that Jae-hong will not continue listening to such talk. However, his outburst is suddenly interrupted by a blinding light radiating from the ceremonial grounds, leaving everyone in shock at its intensity. Elder Cheol-jung, however, is the most stunned among them, unable to believe what is happening or what it means. While Minister Jae-hong is no less astonished, his reaction is different. Jae-hong's face fills with pride and joy, remarking in disbelief that even though Jae-hong is witnessing it with his own eyes, he still cannot fully accept it. The light emanating from the ceremonial site and the weapons is more dazzling than ever before. Among them, the Blood Spirit Spear, Iron Epic Blade, shines brilliantly, alongside the legendary sword, Heavenly Maho, and the Great Celestial Dragon Crossbow. Even weapons that already have chosen wielders respond strongly to the presence of the illegitimate son, Young. It is an unbelievable sight. Even the elder members of the clan find their own weapons reacting to Young. The eldest brother, Jae-hong, questions whether anyone can believe what they are witnessing, admitting that their younger brother appears to possess unimaginable talent. Jae-hong then affirms that it certainly seems that way, as the crowd is engulfed in astonishment. Murmurs spread. How could an illegitimate child possibly achieve this? But the patriarch, Jae-shin, silences everyone with his firm voice, stating that the clan's laws are clear. Every weapon that chooses the young master must belong to him. However, the matter was not so simple. Jae-shin then declares that he will accept suggestions that might help resolve this issue. Minister Jae-hong raises his hand, announcing that he has an idea, prompting Patriarch Lee Jae-shin to ask him to present it. The minister proposes that granting the child all these weapons would contradict the true purpose of the steel selection ceremony, as the ritual must continue for generations to come. Therefore, the child should be allowed to choose only one weapon from among them. The Patriarch Jae-shin agrees, remarking that it is not a bad idea and deciding to implement it. As a result, the weapons are presented before Young, and he is placed at the center to choose the one he desires. Cheol feels that this ceremony is entirely different from the steel selection Cheol experienced in his previous life. However, this works in his favor, as Cheol decides to seize the opportunity to gain the greatest advantage possible. Cheol begins walking among the weapons, examining the swords, such as the dragon-slaying butterfly of Slain, the sacred spears crafted from the bones of the holy white whale, and the magical staves like Valheim, forged from the world tree, where the spirits slumber. Cheol also passes by the celestial sword, said to have been created when the sun, moon, and stars aligned. But Cheol is searching for the greatest weapon of them all, and Cheol has already made his decision. Lee Jae-shin notices the direction in which his son, Young, is heading and realizes his destination. Cheol is moving toward the sword discovered by the clan's founder in the unexplored lands, a sword covered in dust, shrouded in mystery, with no one ever having been able to unlock its true power. This is the Black Twilight Sword, the weapon Cheol has chosen. Patriarch Lee Jae-shin ponders the known abilities of the sword, which do not justify its classification as a heavenly ranked weapon. Yet, it has been stored among the celestial weapons, perhaps because it serves as a symbol tied to the clan's founder. None of the clan's descendants or ancestors had ever been chosen by this sword. Still, Jae-shin is uncertain whether this is merely a random selection by a young child, or if there is a deeper significance behind it. Father Lee Jae-shin lifts Young in his arms, affirming that this is undoubtedly another divine intervention. The child, Young, had made his choice, and in turn, Young had been chosen by the sword of the great ancestor, the Black Twilight Sword. Thus, the steel selection ceremony came to an end. At that moment, Lady Beck commented that as an illegitimate son, Young would become a great nuisance to them. However, she would not hesitate to eliminate him if Young ever stood in her way. 9 years have passed since the day of the steel selection, and Young grew up within the Lee clan's palace. One morning, Young informed his caretaker that he would be heading for training in the afternoon. Gawa attempted to accompany him, but Young refused, assuring her that he could go on his own. Gawa remarked that the training ground seemed empty, questioning why he would go to train alone, especially since the first training area was not particularly large. Young replied that someone was waiting for him there. Suddenly, a loud scream interrupted their conversation. Gawa noted that it seemed someone was training in the 7th area. Indeed, a young black-haired trainee was present there with an instructor, warning her about the way the black-haired girl was gripping her sword, cautioning that she would end up injuring herself if she continued that way. That trainee was Li Hua, who was practicing swordsmanship. When Young and his caretaker, Gawa, arrived at the scene, they realized that the scream had come from Liwa. The caretaker, Gawa, advised Young to address her as his elder sister rather than calling her eighth or using any other title. Young muttered in protest, pointing out that the age difference between them was barely 5 months, so why should Young speak to her with excessive respect? They continued listening as the instructor gave Liwa advice, telling her to treat the sword as if it were an extension of her body and to grip it carefully to avoid injury. However, Liwa became furious at his remarks and yelled at him to stop bothering her with constant criticism, insisting that what truly mattered was fighting with the sword, regardless of how Wa held it. The instructor attempted to calm Wa down, urging her to take her time and try again, reassuring Wa that he had confidence in her success this time. At that moment, Young asked his caretaker, Gawa, about the identity of the instructor who was making such an effort to train Wa. Gawa responded that he was Li Hyun from the Ebony Division. Young remarked that he seemed far too talented to be an instructor for a 9-year-old girl. His caretaker, Gawa, reacted emotionally, pointing out that a suitable instructor for his talent would be assigned soon as well. Then, Gawa suddenly burst into tears, apologizing for her inability to care for Young properly due to her own shortcomings, especially since Lady Wa had grown up in an environment that provided proper nutrition. Young asked her to stop repeating such talk, assuring Gawa that he was grateful to her but had no need for trainers like those. Young explained that they had come to the clan because of its martial prowess, not for his sake personally. Moreover, Young revealed that he had already found the right people to learn from in the first training grounds, an exclusive training area. The space was filled with weapons that symbolized the prestige of the Li clan, renowned for its martial arts excellence. Young commented that the place felt more like a museum than a training ground, but Young knew there was a good reason for its existence. The reason was that this area stored ancient weapons, unlike the other training zones. Young looked around and spotted an old sword. Stepping forward to take it, Young considered that for now, he could use it solely for training. As Young began practicing, he reflected on the sudden changes that had taken place since Young returned 9 years into the past. However, what astonished him the most among them all was Young's strange new ability, the power to read the memories stored within weapons. Young focused on the memories within the sword, allowing him to reinforce his fundamentals as they formed the very basis of advanced techniques. Young started executing the movements he saw in the sword's memories, enabling him to learn and train more effectively than any instructor could teach. The older and more prestigious a weapon was, and the stronger the bond between it and its wielder, the clearer Young could perceive its memories. After years of training, Young successfully mastered the 7-star sword technique, having been able to read most of the memories from the weapons stored here over the past 2 years. However, Young's concentration was suddenly interrupted when someone commented that it had been a long time since they last saw someone capable of mastering the 7-star sword. Turning around, Young found himself face to face with a clan minister, his uncle, Lord Jaehong, a 4th-rank warrior. Although Jaehong is not a direct descendant of the clan, his acknowledged skills earned him the rank of general. Moreover, he was one of the closest people to Young, both in this life and the previous one, always standing by Young's side. His uncle Jaehong spoke with pride, saying that he sees Young training every day and catches sight of him whenever Jaehong returns from his duties. He acknowledges the injustice Young feels due to his siblings' discrimination and favoritism against him, but encourages him to move past it and prove himself. Young replies that he is fine, but he is still a member of the esteemed Li clan. Young fully understands that recognition from the clan will only be earned through his swordsmanship skills. That is why Young has resolved to prove himself solely through his own strength. Jaehong feels a sense of pride in Young, yet at the same time, Jaehong is troubled by the reality that Young will always remain an illegitimate child, no matter what he achieves. Young's uncle Jaehong then informs him that the time is approaching for him to reach the age of eligibility for the naming ceremony. Jaehong then adds that though it might be late to ask this, Jaehong wondered if Young would accept him as his instructor until the ceremony arrives. However, Young's response surprises Jaehong when he outright refuses the offer. Jae-hong asks why and what makes Young unwilling to have him as a personal mentor. Young replies that he is aware of the rule prohibiting him from having a teacher before the naming ceremony, and Young does not wish to put his uncle Jae-hong in a difficult position. His uncle responds that his siblings do not care about such rules and break them all the time, training under renowned masters while following diets rich in nutrients. But Young answers that he believes rules should not be taken lightly, even if others disregard them. Moreover, as Young had stated before, he wants to prove himself on his own. Uncle Jae-hong is deeply moved. He never expected to hear such words from a child who had not yet turned 10. In fact, Young's gaze reminds him of his eldest brother, the clan leader. Jae-hong replies that it is now evident he will not be able to change Young's mind, noting that he is just as stubborn as his father and not easily persuaded. As such, regrettably, Jae-hong will be of no use to Young. This frustrates Jae-hong, but he still asks if there is anything he can do to help. Young realizes that this is the opportunity he had been waiting for. Young had hoped his uncle Jae-hong would ask this very question. Young tells him that he does indeed need a favor. Jae-hong, feeling excited, urges Young not to hesitate and to tell him what he needs right away. However, Jae-hong's excitement quickly turns into astonishment when Young requests permission to see what lies inside the secret vault. After that, Mr. Jae-hong gets into his car and heads toward a heavily guarded building. However, a security guard blocks Jae-hong's path, requesting him to stop for a moment. The security guard then asks for his identification and the reason for Jae-hong's visit to this particular place. Jae-hong responds by introducing himself as the general supervisor of Taehong, explaining that Jae-hong is here for the regular evaluation. Accompanying Jae-hong is the youngest son of the Marshall Lee family, Mr. Young, who is here as an observer to learn and gain experience. The security guard confirms Jae-hong's identity and then grants him entry as the gates open. The car proceeds inside. Young tries to act with childlike innocence to avoid suspicion, looking around in awe as if he were a fascinated child. Young continues to express amazement at the sheer size of the place, but Mr. Jae-hong notices his unusual reaction and asks if Young is truly that excited. Young enthusiastically affirms, explaining that this warehouse holds the family's greatest treasures. This convinces Young that once he reaches his destination, he will find what he is searching for, a legendary weapon and an ancient artifact unknown to most. For those who seek rare relics, this warehouse may contain items beyond their wildest expectations, as it is the armory of the Lee Marshall clan. At this point, Mr. Jae-hong explains that the lower floor houses weapons that have been sealed away for certain reasons. Young, in astonishment, asks if these weapons are at the level of monstrous entities that could consume their wielders. Mr. Jae-hong acknowledges Young's knowledge of such matters, but warns Young that recklessly using such a weapon could lead to both physical and mental destruction. When Jae-hong notices a hint of concern on Young's face, he asks if Young wishes to back out if he is afraid. However, Young firmly denies any fear. Mr. Jae-hong reassures Young, stating that there is no need for concern, since Young won't be able to enter such a dangerous place anyway. Jae-hong then informs Young that he will proceed to oversee matters and return shortly. Additionally, Jae-hong advises Young to take his time and explore the area at his leisure. Young bids him farewell as Jae-hong departs. The moment Young is left alone, he sighs, muttering that pretending to be an innocent child is no easy task. Young then uses the elevator to descend to the ground floor, a place known as the Weapons Tomb. It is where numerous great relics and weapons are sealed away. But Young's purpose here is to find a specific weapon, the Infinity Dagger, also known as Boundless. It may appear to be just a dagger, but when infused with magical energy, it transforms, allowing its wielder to alter its shape, length, weight, and all of its attributes at will. Before Young traveled back in time, the person who discovered this weapon was Lee Gunsong. Due to its overwhelming power and unconventional nature, Gunsong was granted the title of Man Ever-Changing, meaning the infinite variable. Young recalls that this very title was what enabled his third brother, Gunsong, to take leadership of the clan instead of the eldest sibling. Later, Gunsong tracked him down and eliminated Young to remove any potential threat. However, this is all Young knows up to this point. To prevent history from repeating itself, Young has only one option. Though the search will take time, Young has no choice but to inspect these weapons one by one, striving to obtain Boundless before his brother, Gunsong, can find it. Thus, Young devotes his time to searching for the Infinity Dagger. However, an hour has passed since Young arrived, and he has examined nearly every dagger-like weapon. Yet, Young has found nothing that resembles Boundless. Despite this, Young remains certain that the weapon is here. Therefore, he must search more thoroughly, without any carelessness. As Young continues exploring the area, he accidentally bumps into a table, causing a rusty weapon to fall from it. This surprises Young, as the weapon is heavily encrusted with rust, making Young wonder how it could have reached such an extreme state of decay. As Young approaches the weapon, an immense surge of energy bursts from it, startling and alarming him, as Young has no idea what is happening. All of a sudden, without any warning or explanation, Young finds himself in an unfamiliar place, a scene of devastation, corpses, and chaos. Young quickly realizes that this must be the memory embedded within the rusted dagger. Yet, something about these memories feels vastly different from any other weapon Young has encountered. A strange sensation washes over Young, as though he had been in this very place before. Suddenly, an overwhelming presence fills the air, pressing down on everything around it with immense force. Young then discovers that this presence belongs to a being that emerged from a blue rift long ago, a primordial monster that had devoured countless civilizations, known as the Apocalypse Beast. A wave of fear engulfs him as Young realizes he is facing imminent doom. Even if this is just a memory, there is no possible way Young could defeat such a being. The only logical option is to flee. But just as Young considers running, an ancient warrior resembling a samurai appears behind him with breathtaking speed. The warrior charges toward the beast, while Young watches in complete shock. Young follows the warrior's movements as the warrior strikes the monstrous being down in a single slash. At that moment, Young realizes that the man before him is a demon-slaying warrior. However, Young remains unable to comprehend how this warrior managed to annihilate such a colossal entity with just one attack. Young's curiosity about the fighter's identity deepens until Young is utterly stunned, realizing that the warrior has noticed his presence and is now questioning who he is. This should not be possible. The warrior then demands to know why Young is in this place, and it does not stop there. Without hesitation, the warrior launches an attack, declaring that he will send Young out of this world in the most merciful and painless way possible. As Young lets out a cry in response to the assault, Young suddenly finds himself back in reality. The rusted dagger falls from Young's grasp as he remains frozen in fear and awe at what he just witnessed. His body begins trembling uncontrollably. It is the first time Young has ever experienced anything like this. The sensation from witnessing the weapon's memories felt more real than mere illusion, as if Young had actually been there at that moment. Young notices something strange about the rusted dagger. He picks it up again, becoming absolutely certain that this is the weapon Young came for. He deliberately pricks his hand with the blade, letting it draw blood, sealing Young's decision to claim it as his own. The dagger flares with intense light, its energy bursting forth before gradually settling down, a sign that it has acknowledged Young as its new master. Excited, Young begins testing the weapon, striking with it multiple times, even attempting to replicate the movements of skilled sword masters. Though Young's heart races with exhilaration at wielding such a powerful weapon, he grows more confident with each motion. By the time he finishes experimenting, he has no doubt the weapon in his possession is boundless. This realization fills him with immense pride and satisfaction. A week after obtaining Boundless, Young continues his relentless training in mastering its use, disguising it as a ring on his finger to ensure no one discovers its existence. However, Young's mind remains fixated on recalling the stance and technique the warrior in the dagger memory used to slay the beast. Yet, Young's understanding of it remains limited. Young knows only the name of the technique and its form, as if Young is still far from grasping its full potential. Despite this, beyond its sheer power, the warrior's movements exuded grace and precision. No matter how many times Young attempts to replicate them, he fails each time. Yet, he does not feel frustrated, for before Young turned back time, he was only half-talented. Young could not even master the basic technique of his clan. Though it is just one technique, it is the first time Young has ever encountered an advanced combat style. That is why Young must understand how the man executed those flawless movements. After all, Young was the closest person to the warrior and the only one who could remember the warrior's exact way of fighting. Suddenly, an unexpected thought crosses Young's mind. He's not an adult like the warrior Young saw in boundless memories. Young is merely a child, not older than 9. It is unreasonable to expect himself to imitate the movements of a grown man, so naturally, Young cannot fully display his potential. Young decides to adjust the technique to suit his own body and strength, executing it smoothly and with controlled precision. Young closes his eyes, attempting to gather his energy and focus more on his own combat style. Young then begins wielding his sword in a manner that suits his body, utilizing fluidity and calm precision. With repeated attempts, Young finally succeeds in demonstrating his true strength, executing an impressive sword strike. A wave of exhilaration washes over him as Young realizes he is finally beginning to sense true power. Now all that remains is finding a solution to Young's struggle with using magical energy. Despite Young's repeated attempts to apply the magical energy circulation technique he learned long ago, it never seems to work for him. This means something crucial is still missing. This makes it incredibly difficult to perform techniques that rely on magical energy. But in any case, Young has no choice but to keep trying. Just as Young resumes his training, a black-haired girl suddenly appears behind Young, holding his sword and asking where Young learned that technique. Young turns to the black-haired girl, puzzled by her identity. Though Young immediately notices that her black hair and honeybee-colored eyes indicate that she belongs to the direct lineage of the Martial clan, the black-haired girl responds in surprise, wondering if Young truly does not recognize her or if Young is merely pretending. However, the black-haired girl soon laughs it off, joking that it is entirely possible Young has never seen her before, especially since the black-haired girl rarely shows her face. The black-haired girl then steps closer and asks for his name. Young replies by introducing himself. The black-haired girl chuckles, commenting that Young's name is quite unique before introducing herself as Lee Jaeanga. At that moment, Young realizes that she is his youngest aunt, Lee Jaeanga, something Young's uncle Jae-hong had once mentioned to him before Young turned back time. Aunt Jaeanga approaches Young again, repeating her question about where or from whom Young learned that technique. Young, in turn, asks why Jaeanga is so interested in knowing. Jaeanga explains that what Young just performed is an ancient martial art combat style Jaeanga is particularly fond of. Jaeanga then elaborates that in this historical period, powerful magical beasts are still active. Reaching into her pocket, Jaeanga retrieves an old journal or book and hands it to Young, saying it is a gift from her. Young is taken aback by the gesture, but accepts it nonetheless. He then asks Jaeanga about its contents. Jaeanga simply urges Young to open it and read. As Young flips through the pages, he realizes that it is a handwritten journal, though the handwriting is terrible. However, its content appears to discuss magical techniques. Not only that, but it also contains highly advanced combat knowledge that is difficult for Young to comprehend. This makes Young wonder if the rumors about his aunt were actually false. At that moment, Aunt Lee Jaeanga points to some of the writings, explaining that these ancient magical techniques are based on magical pathways. In the past, magic could only be used by channeling it through internal pathways. In the modern era, however, magic is stored within the heart before being utilized. Jaeanga then asks if Young believes it is wise to dismiss ancient magic as useless, pointing out that it is entirely possible that past magical techniques were far more advanced than those of the present. For this reason, Jaeanga has been researching amplification and transformation techniques. However, Jaeanga still lacks sufficient records. Young realizes that Jaeanga is referring to techniques similar to boundless magical abilities. So, Young asks Jaeanga to wait for a moment. Young then turns back to his sword, contemplating how magical energy spreads from its source throughout the body. Young soon notices that the energy does not return to its source, which means all Young has to do is circulate the magic solely through the magical pathways. This was the method Young previously failed to understand from the warrior in Boundless Memories. But now, to some extent, Young has reached a viable conclusion. Young confirms his success when he sees his strike become significantly stronger. Young is completely astonished as he witnesses firsthand the immense difference when using magical energy. Young's aunt, Lee Jae-anga, is equally shocked. She approaches Young and asks if Young fully understands what Young just accomplished and how Young managed to achieve it. Jae-anga then inquires whether this is truly the amplification technique and asks Young to explain how he was able to master it. Young avoids giving a direct answer and instead asks Jae-anga why he should reveal such information. Jae-anga responds by saying that Young managed to reach this level thanks to the notebook Jae-anga gave him. And besides, Jae-anga has dedicated her entire life to ancient martial arts. Jae-anga spent over 10 years searching for this combat style, even after being cast out of the family home. Jae-anga then offers Young a deal. If he tells her, she will do anything Young asks in return. Young replies that he has 3 conditions before answering Jae-anga. The first is that she must never speak about Young or anything related to him to anyone no matter what, unless Young grants Jae-anga permission. She agrees immediately, but asks why Young is so secretive. Young explains that he dislikes people talking about him recklessly. Young then continues, stating that the second condition is that Jae-anga must never lie to Young again, so they can build mutual trust. Young assures her that if Jae-anga abides by this, he will tell her the truth as much as he can. Jae-anga agrees to this condition as well, then asks about Young's final request. Young takes a moment to think, then begins explaining the details of his last condition to his aunt, Jae-anga. A year after Young's encounter with his aunt Jae-anga, Young is training in the courtyard when his caretaker, Gawa, approaches with his aunt present. Young asks why Gawa has come to the training grounds. Gawa hands Young a sealed envelope, informing him that it arrived today. Young takes the envelope, appearing as though he had expected it, while his aunt Lee Jae-anga remains unaware of its contents. Upon opening it, Young discovers that it contains a summon detailing the instructions for the naming ceremony. However, Young quickly notices that the seal and signature do not belong to Young's father but rather to Elder Myung-jung, which surprises him. Young finds it strange, as Young had not heard any news about being assigned to a mission anytime soon. Young's aunt Lee Jae-anga becomes furious upon learning about the naming ceremony. Young, puzzled by Jae-anga's reaction, asks why Jae-anga is so upset. She tells Young that they have only just begun achieving some stability, and if Young attends the naming ceremony, Young will be bound to remain there. Jae-anga tries to convince Young not to go at all. However, Young understands why his aunt Jae-anga is taking such a stance. Young knows they had made an agreement between them and had been conducting research on magical arts together. They had been studying the differences between ancient magic, which relies on the magical core, and modern magic, which depends on magical pathways, working on developing a new form of magic that integrates both. Their approach involved using the magical core to store and alter the properties of magical energy, while utilizing magical pathways to control and activate it efficiently. Thanks to this, Young had gained magical abilities that surpassed those of his peers. But now, Young's aunt Jae-anga would undoubtedly keep pressuring Young not to attend. Still, Young knows that failing to appear at the ceremony would have severe consequences. So, Young tries to reason with Jae-anga, explaining that Young cannot avoid attending the naming ceremony. Young reassures Jae-anga that there is no need to worry. Although their research time will be slightly reduced, Young's training in magic and the restoration of ancient magical arts will continue as planned. Young's aunt Jae-anga then asks how Young intends to accomplish that, especially since Young's schedule during the naming ceremony will undoubtedly be packed with training. Young replies that he will train in modern magical techniques while simultaneously continuing his study of ancient magical arts, assuring Jae-anga that there is nothing to worry about. Thus, Young begins his special training for the naming ceremony, where instructor Jang Wook announces that they will start by enduring magical attacks for half an hour. Young notices that things have changed from the past, just as Young expected. Previously, as the ninth child, someone who had not even received basic training, Young should have been overwhelmed and collapsed instantly. But now, Young is capable of using magic to defend himself against those attacks. The instructor takes note of what Young is doing, realizing that Young is blocking all the attacks effortlessly, as if merely playing with them. What is even stranger is that Young is simultaneously observing the eighth trainee, evaluating her skills, and monitoring the effectiveness of her previous training under instructor Jang Wook. Considering that all of this is coming from an illegitimate child who has yet to turn 10, the situation is incredibly perplexing. At this point, even referring to Young as an illegitimate child feels like an insult, in light of the abilities Young possesses. Instructor Jang Wook reflected to himself, realizing that he needed to reconsider his perspective, especially since this training was not merely preparation for the naming ceremony, but a means to pass down all the knowledge they possessed to the young master. Finally, after an exhausting day of training, Young finishes his session and feels the need to rest. However, Young cannot stop thinking about how insane his clan must be for making a 10-year-old endure a barrage of electric shocks under the pretense of building resistance to magical attacks. What Young did not expect, however, was for the instructor to apologize for this evaluation method. Young also began to notice that the way others looked at Young had changed slightly compared to the past. In any case, Young needed to leave now and get some rest before the next training session. As Young prepares to leave, he notices Hwa suddenly attacking him, but he manages to block Hwa's strike. She tells Young that Hwa wants to talk to him before Young leaves. He responds by telling Hwa to be quick, as Young has no time to waste on Hwa, which makes Hwa furious. She warns Young about his words, reminding Young that she is the legitimate daughter, whereas Young is nothing more than an illegitimate child. Unbothered, Young turns away and walks off, saying Young has no time for her. Hwa's anger escalates, and she uses her magical power to attack Young, demanding that Young not ignore her while Hwa is speaking. Young notices Hwa resorting to magic, but effortlessly evades Hwa's attack again. Young stops Hwa by grabbing her by the collar, forcing Hwa to halt. Young then tells Hwa that she can go cry to Hwa's mother if she wants, but Hwa should stop bothering Young because he has no time for Hwa's nonsense. Frustrated, Young walks away, but Hwa suddenly starts speaking, telling Young that because of what Young did, along with the incident during the sword possession ceremony at the steel selection ritual, Hwa is now constantly being compared to Young. This has made things completely unfair for her. Hwa hardly sleeps, eats only small meals, and does nothing but train, while all Young had to do was be born with a great talent. Young responds by saying that blaming others for personal failures is undoubtedly convenient. As Hwa said herself, Young is just an illegitimate child. That means even having the luxury of shifting blame onto others is something Young does not have. If Hwa cannot sleep, then she should simply stay awake. If Hwa cannot keep up with Young because of her diet, then Hwa might as well stop eating altogether. And if Hwa holds a grudge against Young, she should do everything in her power to defeat Young. As for an apology for everything Young just said, Hwa should take it by force, because that is the way of their clan. Enraged, Hwa declares that she will surpass Young in the naming ceremony and make Young feel humiliated for his words. Hwa even claims that she will force Young to bow down and beg for her forgiveness as his elder sister. Young simply replies that he will be waiting to see if Hwa can make that happen. In the 7th training area designated for direct members of the family, Lady Baek Hwan arrives. She orders the servants to leave, stating that she wishes to speak with her daughter, Hwa, in private. Upon entering the hall, Baek Hwan finds Hwa training alone. Baek Hwan calls out to Hwa and asks what she is doing there by herself. Realizing that her mother has arrived, Hwa turns to face her. Hwa responds that she was just training for a while. Lady Baek Hwan asks if the rumors about Hwa being defeated by the illegitimate son are true. Hwa remains silent, prompting her mother to continue speaking, reminding Hwa that she had told her before, if she could not handle Young, Hwa needed to crush him. If Hwa was doing all of this to avoid punishment, Hwa could stop, as her mother no longer intends to punish Hwa anyway. Hwa responds, saying that she fully understands how her mother views her training, but Hwa is doing it because she wants to. She truly desires to defeat that person, not because she was ordered to, but because Hwa wants to achieve it on her own. Her mother asks if she has been influenced by that illegitimate son, Young, whose training has had no clear foundations so far. Lady Baekwaeun then reminds her that Hwa is from the main lineage of the Martial Lee clan, whereas Young is merely an illegitimate child, meaning they are entirely different. Naturally, overcoming Young should be expected, but it seems Hwa has been affected by Young, which explains her enthusiasm. After that, her mother hands Hwa a bottle containing a liquid, telling her that this is dreamlike trance, a deadly poison. Lady Baekwaeun then adds that if Hwa cannot surpass Young, Hwa has another option. She can eliminate Young. After all, this is the way of the Martial Lee clan. When it comes to achieving victory, meanwhile, at Young's residence, his caretaker, Gawa, reviews Young's weekly results and is visibly surprised. In particular, when Gawa reads the 14th week's report, she finds that Young has secured first place. Young asks Gawa's opinion, wondering if she feels relieved that her efforts with Young were not in vain. Gawa embraces Young and tells him that she did nothing at all. It was Young's hard work that got him this far. Suddenly, Young's aunt, Lee Jae-anga, bursts into the room, radiating excitement as she urges Young to join her for training. Young replies that he has just returned from a training session, but Jae-anga smiles and tells Young that if he trains in magic with her, he will feel all his exhaustion fade away. Young responds by saying he has never heard of such a thing, but Jae-anga insists, confident that Young will feel better if he trains with her. Young agrees, mentioning that he actually wants to show her something. His aunt, Jae-anga, asks Young what it is, but then suddenly stops as if she has already guessed. She then asks Young if it has to do with the first star. Young chuckles and looks at Jae-anga, confirming her suspicion. After that, Young follows his aunt, Jae-anga, who begins explaining that the foundation of magical techniques consists of 3 stages. The first stage is body reinforcement, which enhances durability and strength. Next is the inner energy stage, which alters the nature of magical power. Finally, there is the external power stage, allowing the user to manifest supernatural abilities through magic. However, Jae-anga explains that the magic she wants to teach Young is different. Even in the first stage, it allows for multiple forms and a variety of abilities. That is why Jae-anga's magic is divided into stages of stars. She then asks Young if he feels uncomfortable handling his magical energy circuit. Jae-anga had assumed it would take Young at least another year to get accustomed to it. Young replies that he understood everything while studying, but he nearly failed in controlling his magical energy. He had almost disrupted the balance between the energy source and its pathways. Young's aunt, Jae-anga, tells him that all he needs to do is allow the energy to flow naturally. Magical energy moves on its own, just like water, and in the end, their bodies are merely vessels that contain this power. Jae-anga encourages Young, expressing her confidence that he will eventually master it. Even if it takes time, Jae-anga has no doubt that Young will succeed. Jae-anga embraces him again, telling Young how lucky she is to be training with him. Young tries to free himself, saying Jae-anga is practically crushing his neck with her strength. Jae-anga finally lets Young go, but he gasps for air. She then tells Young that they must begin training now so that he can reach the second star in magical energy control. Jae-anga asks him if he knows that the first star he has achieved now is different from an ordinary star. Young replies that he is already aware of that. His aunt, Jae-anga, then asks him what skill he believes he excels at the most. Young takes a moment to think, then answers that swordsmanship is likely his greatest strength. His aunt, Jae-anga, responds in shock, saying that she does not believe swordsmanship is Young's greatest strength. Young is surprised by Jae-anga's statement, insisting that she has seen him use sword techniques. She clarifies that while Young is indeed skilled in swordsmanship, she sees a talent in him that surpasses even that. Young's greatest ability is his mastery of magic. His magical capabilities are beyond comprehension, far superior to any other skill Young possesses, to the extent that any other talent pales in comparison. Jae-anga adds that she has personally tried training others in the magic she developed, but no one has ever accomplished what he has. Young is astonished by Jyanga's words, especially since before he turned back time, he was constantly criticized for his magical abilities. Young's aunt, Jyanga, continues, saying that for someone like him, attaining the second star should not be a challenge. If Young succeeds, then the naming ceremony will be incredibly easy for him. From now on, Jyanga will be teaching Young real techniques, so he needs to pay close attention and focus in order to progress quickly. Young assures Jyanga that he will follow her instructions exactly, but he also wants to know what the object beside her is. His aunt, Jyanga, laughs, explaining that it will be used in their training. Then, without warning, Jyanga hurls something at Young with great speed and force, scratching Young's face. Jyanga tells him that these are iron spheres. She emphasizes that Young must be able to release magical energy while in motion. After all, any magical technique that is performed while standing still is nothing more than dead magic. Now it is time to begin training for the naming ceremony. Young forces a smile, fully aware of the grueling training that awaits him. During the next training session for the naming ceremony, the leader of the Blood Tiger Corps, Lee Jungkwon, introduces himself, announcing that he will now be training the children of the martial Lee clan. Jungkwon then instructs Young and Hwa to choose the weapon they wish to use and bring it within 1 minute. Young and Hwa move to comply, but Young notices that Hwa keeps glancing at him. Young asks if she has a problem with him. Hwa hesitates, then denies it, insisting that she wants nothing from Young. Hwa then asks if he also uses a sword. Young, walking ahead, replies that he does not. Hwa responds by saying that based on her previous observations, she is certain that Young has skill in swordsmanship. Afterward, Young and Hwa return to instructor Jungkwon, who questions Young about what he is doing. Young explains that he was gathering weapons. Instructor Jungkwon remarks that he only asked them to bring the weapons they would be using. Young replies that these are, in fact, the weapons he will be using. Instructor Jungkwon eyes him with suspicion, commenting that he had thought Young was a smart student, but now he sees that Young is completely foolish. Jungkwon then instructs Young to remember his words carefully, stating that he will teach them vision but will not impart any specific techniques or stances. Jungkwon explains that the martial clan has many secrets, known as the Enlightenment, hidden techniques. To master these techniques, they must first awaken the sixth sense that lies dormant in their blood. From now on, Jungkwon's role will be to help them awaken their senses, so they should not make his job any harder than it already is. Young and Hwa stand tensely, unsure of what instructor Jungkwon is about to do. But suddenly, Jungkwon attacks them, warning that they must not lose consciousness from the very beginning and stressing that they must focus immediately. Jungkwon then delivers a powerful strike at Young, sending him flying. But Young quickly attempts to defend himself and block the blow. The instructor observes Young's reaction and is impressed by his quick reflexes and ability to counter the attack despite the sudden assault. Young, meanwhile, is astonished that instructor Jungkwon resorted to such an extreme approach right from the start. Young braces himself for the instructor's next move, recalling that in his previous life, he never received proper training. But this time, things are entirely different, and Young must prove himself. Young charges forward, launching an attack on instructor Jungkwon.